Hi, this is Mr. Alexis. Today, I'd like to show you a slideshow about what communism was like in Poland after World War II from 1945 to 1989. If you recall, communism is a system of government where basically the government controls everything that's produced, everything that's made, where people work, how much things cost, and how available those items are. Um, Communist Poland was also a totalitarian state where the government, basically, with the help of the police, controlled every aspect of society as far as um, censorship, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, like newspapers, TV, radio. All of that was controlled by the government. I had an opportunity to, the last time I was in Poland, to visit the Museum of Life in the Polish People's Republic, or it's in Warsaw, the capital of Poland. Um, Here you see in this picture what Warsaw, the capital of Poland, looked like in 1945 after World War II. Basically, World War II in Europe started in Poland. Every Everything was destroyed between the Russians and the Germans fighting over Poland. It's basically destroyed. They had to almost start from scratch at the end of the war. Okay, it's kind of a myth that everybody in Poland after World War II wanted communism. Basically, after World War II, there was a small minority of communists. But the thing is, the Russians or the Soviet Union were in control of Poland. And they wanted to get control of all the countries around the Soviet Union. So they would have like a buffer zone to where something like World War II would never happen again, where they would never be invaded. So they tried to get control, and they did get control of many of the countries um, on their border, and one of them was Poland. So very few people wanted Poland to be communist, but the Russians assisted the communists in Poland to get control. The way the Russians or the Soviets did this is by rigging elections. Okay, so they would make sure that only their candidate was on the ballot, and if there wasn't a candidate that wanted democracy or had different views, they would uh, try to make sure that that candidate for democracy did not get any votes. If you protested the things that the Russians were trying to implement in Poland, they had what was called the NKVD, that would basically the secret police. They could beat you up, they could put you in prison, and they could send you, just make you pack up all your things and go into exile in Siberia. And and so that's kind of how communism started in Poland. Here you see the ruins of Warsaw after World War II. As you can see, it's just in complete ruins. People were living wherever they could, outdoors, in very primitive buildings until more could get fixed. Okay, so what was food? How did people get food in Poland? Well, one of the ways they got food was through these ration cards, or kind of like coupons that basically maybe once a month or every so often you would get these ration cards, and they would tell you how much food you would get. And for example, this one here is flour, this one's sugar, this is cigarettes and alcohol. And cigarettes and alcohol were some of the few luxury items that the ordinary person could get. Um, the elite Communist Party officials had access to their own stores, which, ironically enough, um, those elite stores would only take US dollars, which is interesting. But basically, they were trying to make it where everybody got the same thing. So here's an example of the coupon, like I said. Okay, so even if you had the coupons or you had the cash to go buy things, that didn't mean that you could just go to the store and everything you wanted in the store would be there. They had a lot of shortages on food, And so you had to use your connections to kind of figure out if the store is going to have food or not. So, for example, my wife, who is Polish, remembers standing in line all night to wait in line to buy a kilo of sausage. Okay. So you wait in line all night, and you might get to the front of the line only to see this store, the everything was sold out, and basically the store was empty. So then you would have to wait till the next time a new shipment came in. But oftentimes the stores were just empty like this. For some reason, they always had bottles of vinegar. You could always buy as much vinegar as you wanted, which is kind of strange. Okay, so the picture you see here is about a month's worth of food for one person. Um, if you wanted something better, if you wanted something more, you had to have hard currency like dollars or German marks. They even had one store only for elites where you could buy things in dollars, but you would have to find some way to save up dollars, which was very difficult and could be illegal, and to buy anything more. Fruits and vegetables, those kinds of things, you would buy at a farmer's market with the money you got as part of your salary. But basically, here you see this is flour, that's sugar. What else do we have here? Maybe some butter, of course, the vodka, and cigarettes, which were kind of how they kept people somewhat happy in this kind of gray existence. Okay, so here you see what a typical living room would look like in a block apartment, which would be pretty much what the common person in Poland would live in. Here in the background, you can see what looks like. You can see what the block would look like from the outside. Basically, they're just cubbyhole type apartments. If you can imagine um, a large room in your house or in an apartment that you have here in the United States, well, basically the entire room that it would be as your entire house would be as the size of a room here in the United States. Okay, now all this their appliances look like something you would see in the United States maybe back in the 1940s, early 1950s, but this is actually what it looked like in the 1980s. It's basically a time stood still kind of thing. Here you see another view of the what an apartment would look like in Poland. This is the dining room right here with the table and the stools, and you see the telephone and the old what looks like to us an old TV. So this is kind of the um, standard of living for a home in Poland. And you think, oh, this doesn't look so good, but in reality, you would have to wait months or sometimes years for the opportunity to live in an apartment. And basically, getting a house or your own apartment was a privilege that only people who were doing the right things. You had to be doing the right things at your job and be recognized by the party in order to even get a chance to live in an apartment like this. And oftentimes, you had more than one generation of people living in this size of an apartment. You might have your grandmother, grandfather, your parents, and you would have to live with them basically until well into maybe your 20s or 30s until you could get an apartment on your own. Here we see another view of the apartment. Everyone had the same furniture, which was kind of strange. It might be arranged differently, but they only made a few different types of furniture. And so everybody in the whole town, all over Poland, would have the same furniture. It might be arranged a little bit differently, but it was the same. All right, here we see kind of a bathroom type setup. This thing with the barrel, it looks like a barrel here, was a washing machine. It's a Russian washing machine. Something like this probably, you know, you would see in the United States maybe through the 40s, but this was the kind of washing machine they had up through even the 1980s in Poland and other communist countries. Basically, you filled up with water and detergent, put the clothes in there, and then use this crank to basically wring out the clothes. And then when you're done, you would take all the dirty water and empty it into a toilet or a bathtub. Okay, Polish fashion. Well, just like other things in communist Poland, all of it was kind of the same, kind of drab clothes, not much style. Everybody had pretty much the same clothes because if you bought your clothes from the store only had, the same kinds of shoes, the same dresses, same clothes. Everybody bought the same. There weren't a lot of choices. There were also limited sizes that you could get. Uh, so basically, you had to break. It was really difficult because you would have to wear shoes that didn't fit. Usually, they were too tight, and you had to break them in. If you wanted something better, you would have to learn how to make your own clothes. So a lot of times, people would copy clothes they would see in catalogs from Germany or European clothes. And excuse me, people would sew their own clothes basically. And if you knew how to do that, you could actually sell clothes to people who wanted something better than what you see here. Okay, so very few people could afford a car in communist Poland. You basically had to be one of the elite party members to get a car, or you had to know somebody and have connections in order to be able to buy the car. You'd have to basically make a huge down payment, months or years in advance on the car, and then you may not receive it for months or years after you had started paying for it. This particular car here, they called the Maui Fiat or the little Fiat. It was built in Poland under a license from the Italians, but really there were very few cars on Polish streets. And if you did have a car, you were like really basically a big shot. Okay, so here's the Polish money, which is kind of interesting because you can see how large the values are on these banknotes. But basically, because of inflation, the Polish money was worthless. It was worthless outside of Poland, and because of inflation, they had to keep making larger and larger banknotes to keep up with the inflation. Basically, so for example, by the time they ended this money in 1996, they phased it out. They basically they took four zeros off the end of their money. So basically, a million zloty in 1996 when they phased this money out was worth the equivalent of about $25. So you're talking about spending thousands of Polish zloty to buy say a loaf of bread or something like that. What's another interesting thing about Polish money is that the people that were on the actual banknotes. Like, for example, here is Frederick Chopin, who is a famous composer, like classical music composer. But a lot of these other guys are not famous Polish people. They're basically people that the Communist Party chose to be famous and decided to put on the banknotes. So these guys here are famous Polish communists. Like this guy's a general right here. So that's how kind of how the money looked in Poland. Okay, in communist Poland, what was school like? Well, here are the school supplies you had to choose from. Basically, School in Poland was the same all over the whole country. You went to elementary school, first grade through, or kindergarten through eighth grade. Then at eighth grade, you had to take an exam, and that exam would place you in a school. For high school, the highest high school would prepare you for college. The middle level one, was basically a technical college, where you might learn some things like drafting, um, more high level things, and you could still go to a college if you did well at your in the middle one, the technical one. And then they had a basically a career school was the lowest level high school, and at the lowest level one, you would learn things like hairdressing or construct basic construction, things like that. But here you can see these school supplies, these notebooks. Um, they basically everybody had the same school supplies, the same types of colors, the same types of pencils, glue. This is aluminum foil right here. I don't know why they needed aluminum foil, maybe some kind of arts and crafts. Okay, this is what the inside of a elementary school or preschool would look like um, during communist times in Poland. Pretty bare. Um, and school was mandatory in Poland up through about high school. And then after that, it was your choice whether to go on and become better educated. But uh, if you wanted better things, you needed to be educated. You needed to join the party. Otherwise, life was even more difficult for you. Okay, so say you didn't want to work and you went on strike. You didn't like the way you're being treated. You weren't being paid enough. You didn't have enough food. Well, um, the Polish government, they had a way to deal with you, and they would, if your business went on strike, was causing problems, uh, and you refused to work, they had in Poland they had what was called the Zomo, and they were special riot police that would come in and break up strikes. They had access to airplanes, helicopters, um, kind of like armored personnel carriers, kind of like tanks, and they would basically roll up and hit you with this rubber club, and break up the strike, force you to go back to work, and make arrests. And that's one of the tools the communist government used to control society is through force, like this officer of the Zomo here. Okay, so this picture here is a picture of a theater during martial law. It's like a movie theater. And during martial law in Poland, which lasted from December of 1981 to the spring of 1983, basically people in Poland were fed up with living under communism. They had these strikes. They were protesting not having their rights. And so, under the suggestion of the Russians, um, they basically Poland was put on lockdown by its own government. Okay. They had curfews where every night you had to be home by, say, like 6 o'clock in the evening, and you couldn't go out of your house until 6 o'clock the next morning. You're, you mainly it was just going to work, going to school. They didn't allow people to assemble in large groups. It became much more difficult to get a passport and to travel around the country. And interesting enough, the movie that's being shown right here is a movie called Apocalypse Now, which was a very famous movie in the United States. But basically, in communist countries, it was shown as propaganda because it made the war in Vietnam look bad. And so in Poland, they had propaganda against the United States and against Western countries. They would show show movies. And I say like this one movie, like New Jack City, that would make the conditions that African Americans lived in look bad. It would basically just different types of propaganda to make the West and the United States not look like they were the such a great places to live in, especially compared to Poland, where everyone was supposed to be considered equal. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little glimpse into what life was like in communist Poland. And thanks for watching.